The Baseball Hall of Fame has 340 people in it, and just over 240 of them have been former MLB players. Many people argue that the MLB doesn't induct enough of the game's finest players throughout history. Since the MLB has allowed colored players in 1947, no person has made the Hall of Fame with no involvement with the MLB. This is kinda crazy to think of, as the Baseball Hall of Fame has no official alignment with the MLB and could induct players from other countries and leagues. The Hall of Fame, besides the Negro League players, doesn't really factor in outside of MLB accomplishments such as the World Baseball Classic, the Olympics, or even college, just like how the Basketball Hall of Fame does. However, that is a different conversation for another day. Today, we are going back to look if the Hall of Fame should factor prime over longevity. Before I get into this, like and subscribe, and go follow my Twitter account at casualsporting_. The Hall of Fame, especially over the last 50 years, have cared more about longevity and overall accumulated stats and averages rather than the best players of the game. I simply just don't understand why this has to be the case. For position players, if you don't have a minimum of 2,000 hits, you basically have no chance and minimum discussion of getting in. Yes, longevity is an impressive thing and should be used to help certain players' cases, but I feel like it shouldn't hurt a player's chances either. When I think of a Hall of Famer, I think of the players who, for a better half of a decade at least, was a top 3 to top 5 player of their position and is an important part of baseball's history. For example, a common thing analysts say about a player and his Hall of Fame chances is that he needs to gain more stats or play X amount of more years to get in. That makes no sense to me, as if you consider them a Hall of Fame caliber player, then they should be inducted no matter what amount of stats they ended up with throughout their career. A player that fits this description who plays today is Paul Goldschmidt. If Goldie retired today, most voters might not induct him because he has just over 300 home runs and around 1,700 hits throughout his 12 years played. In his 12 years played, he has constantly been a top 3 first baseman and is definitely a Hall of Fame worthy talent. You shouldn't have to play 15 to 20 years to make it to the Hall of Fame, as everyone doesn't want to, or sometimes their body just doesn't allow them to play into their late 30s or early 40s, and they shouldn't be penalized for this. A stat I think that should hold more weight in Hall of Fame consideration is WAR 7, which is the total WAR, which stands for wins above replacement, of any player's best 7 seasons in the majors. WAR 7 gives you a decent idea of how good a player was at his peak. For example, Goldschmidt WAR 7 is 16th all-time for first baseman and can even go up some, as he's already at his career average WAR of 5.7 per year, and it's only early August. His WAR 7 is higher than 12 of the 23 first basemen in the Hall of Fame. However, his career WAR is below the average of the 23 men by 10. He should be a lock already, even if he decided to retire at the end of the season, simply because at his prime, at his best performances, he was simply a Hall of Fame level player. I understand the argument about them wanting players to be great for a long time, but being a great player for over a decade is pretty much enough in my eyes. This brings up the argument that if more and more players keep getting inducted, then it would start to devalue the Hall of Fame, such how people believe that the Basketball Hall of Fame has turned out. I understand that point completely, and I don't think just anyone should get in, but as I previously stated, if for a better half of a decade you were a multi-time All-Star and one of the best players in the league and at your position, then you deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. I went over the hypothetical Goldie scenario, but I'm going to discuss a few players who retired already, but I believe should get in based off their primes. From 2005 to 2012, Chase Utley and David Wright ranked 2nd and 7th in WAR leaders. The others who round out the top 7 are 3 most likely first ballot Hall of Famers, and another one who probably would have been as well if it wasn't for steroids. Then there's Mark Teixeira, who is someone that could have been a Hall of Famer, but probably just won't make it in. In their best runs of their careers, they were both clearly some of the best players in the league. Of course, WAR isn't everything, but Utley and Wright have other stats to prove it as well. Wright's 133 career OPS plus would have him ranked 13th out of all Hall of Famers that have played in the MLB since the 20th century started, and Utley's .358 on-base percentage would have him tied for 36th out of those same Hall of Famers. Utley as well has had the 4th highest defensive WAR from second basemen since the 20th century started. Utley was a 6-time All-Star, 4-time Silver Slugger, and a World Series champion, and as the defensive WAR proves, a pretty good fielder despite not winning any Gold Gloves, but that is just because there were amazing defenders at second base in the NL at that time, such as Brandon Phillips and Orlando Hudson. David Wright was a 7-time All-Star and won a pair of Gold Gloves and Silver Sluggers, and hold many records all time for the Mets. Stats aren't everything though, as you could see while watching these players that they were amazing players that had big impact on late 2000s baseball and their franchises. Utley played a few years after his prime ended, and Wright only played 209 games over 3 seasons since his last All-Star season in 2013. Both didn't have ideal endings to their careers due to injuries, but that shouldn't hurt their chances of being next to the immortals of the game. Utley probably gets in a few years after his name gets put on the ballot, but it should be less of a debate than it seems like it will be, as he was the best second baseman for close to a decade, despite him not having stats that equal to long longevity. Wright, on the other hand, doesn't seem as he will make it in, as he doesn't have those many years at the end of his career to buff up his stats like how the baseball writers drool for. I hope one day players like Wright get their justice and make it into the Hall of Fame, and this agenda that you have to play 15 plus years or have 2,000 plus hits or 1,000 plus RBIs or other certain stats end, and instead induct players that in their primes were some of the best baseball players in history. Let me know in the comments if you prefer baseball writers to vote based on longevity or a player's peak, and if so, comment some players you think should be in the Hall of Fame. This is Casual Sporting with another video. See you later.